about your audiobook company. And I thought, since there were a few people here who probably remember what it was like to listen to an audiobook in the late or mid to late 1990s, just start by kind of set the scene for us. Like, we didn't have hand computers, we didn't have voice-controlled speakers in our kitchens. So what was the technical solution problem that you were looking at when you said, let's set something up so people can listen to books through digital files?
Yeah, I kind of hate to be the guy who's like, we used to have to walk 3 miles to school, and everybody was in one room, and it was horses and buggies and stuff. But and so Audible was way too early. I was at Bell Labs Research and kind of got recruited out of there to join this startup that had been founded by a non-technology guy, Don Katz, who is also an alum of NYU. And Don is a writer and a journalist, and he had this idea of delivering stories over a network. And he also had the insight that nobody was going to sit in front of their computer and listen to a 6-hour story or a 10-hour story, so you had to make it portable. And at this time, this was in 95, 96, there were no portable audio players. So for those of you who may find this shocking, there were no digital audio players, no portable players. And in fact, back then, there was no Wi-Fi and there was no broadband. It was all dial-up. And it's just, when I think back, it seems so primitive compared with today, where everybody's got a super powerful computer in their pocket and it's connected to the internet almost all the time, and it's just kind of wildly different. So the problem to be solved was, there was lots of problems to be solved. One was we needed a portable player because they didn't exist. So we had to, we worked with a famous design company called IDEO in Palo Alto, California, to design the first digital audio player for the internet, which I happen to have brought here just to show you. It's a kind of an oddball device. It has no screen, which was, we took the fact that the screens were expensive, and so you could make it cheaper by removing the screen. And since all the people who listened to audiobooks were in the car, a screen would have been bad anyway. So we actually were, it was very...
Also, the people who were listening to the audio players that people were using, Walkmans and Discmans, that screen wasn't necessarily a given at that point anyway, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, you'd put one CD in a Discman and you'd do track forward and track back. There wasn't a lot, going, and there were no digital music players. In fact, while I'll get the show and tell over again. So Audible released this. I'll get back to what problem we were trying to solve, but this was released in the fourth quarter of 1997, which is before 3/4 of you were probably born. And it was the first digital audio player, and it predated the MP3 players. And so, in fact, we happen to have the first MP3 player that was ever commercialized, called MP Man, from a little-known Korean company called Sehan. They probably sold 100 of them. Those of us who were in the space at the time bought one. It would hold one album. And I remember at the time we thought, wow, this is amazing. It's digital, there's no moving parts. And we'd put one album on there and you'd listen to it and then you'd say, now I want to listen to something else. And you'd have to go back to your computer and plug it in and futz around with the software and all that. So it was, it didn't go anywhere. It was really the beginning of a huge transformation, which is still underway. But the iPod was the place where it finally crystallized and to everybody to have a digital audio player. Back to the problem we were solving, sorry. There were no devices. Also, Don and all of us actually felt very strongly that we needed to protect the content because the people who were writing these books and recording these audiobooks needed to be paid for them. And so the thought at the time was, you needed to prevent that stuff from being shared illegally. Once it went digital, the concern was, and everybody was super paranoid at the time, that you make something digital that up until then had been on CDs or cassettes, that it was just going to be spread all over the internet and nobody would make any money and the whole thing would collapse. So We had to invent our own digital rights management system. In fact, if those of you who know that term, DRM, the term hadn't been coined yet at the time. So we created our own file format, our own copy protection system, our own software, our own retail site that sold digital goods, which there were none of those at the time. Also, was kind of if you licensed a platform that would do e-commerce, they all wanted to charge shipping, and it was super hard to turn that off, and we didn't have any shipping. So it was just, it was like the very early stages of a big disruptive thing that's taken a long time to happen.
Right. It's funny because you look back now and you describe this as what seems like sort of an onerous process and all of these barriers, but at the time it must have seemed like this great opportunity. Things are changing. This is kind of blue water for us to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the value proposition of this, which was, for the audiobook business in particular, audiobooks were somewhat costly to produce, but actually creating these boxes of CDs or cassettes was hugely costly, and shipping them to bookstores. If you went to a bookstore to try to get an audiobook, there'd be some tiny selection back in the back corner. It wasn't really a super popular thing. And so for us, we could have a big library and we would never run out of inventory. It was going to be digital. That seemed like amazing. And then having it all, having it all on, all in your pocket, and you could get it any time of day. All these things we take for granted now, that you can buy it whenever you want and wherever you want. That was all fresh and exciting, like we were forging ahead, because there were no online retailers of digital content at the time. It was, if anybody remembers real audio, it was the days of real audio where you could stream audio in a little player on your desktop, and that seemed super cool. So it was a very early time, and as you say, those things that now seem ridiculous, things to have to solve, at the time seemed like great opportunities, because we were inventing a new future that we believed in.
And so, but you weren't actually, you mentioned you were at Bell Labs, an organization that has a pretty sterling reputation. People were excited to work there at the time, seemed pretty steady. How'd you end up jumping ship, and for a place that was really just like a couple of employees at that time, right? It seems like kind of a scary leap to make.
Yeah, I mean, Bell Labs is a great place, and I had a great time there, and I feel very privileged to have been there during kind of the tail end of the days when it was just full of super smart people inventing.
Let me just explain Bell Labs a little bit, because I think if you're in tech, and especially if you're old, then Bell Labs was quite a place.
I'll try to make this short. It started out at Bethune and West Street in Manhattan, in a building that was a Westinghouse building, and Western Electric building, and they moved it out to New Jersey during World War II because they were afraid it was going to get bombed. It was doing a bunch of secret stuff for the U.S. at the time, and they moved it into a little known town called Murray Hill, and so then they ended up growing this large sort of industrial research place that was AT&T's, and they invented the communications satellite and the laser and the transistor and Unix and C and C++. I mean, it was just a place with, it has an amazing history. And I got to be kind of at the tail end of that. All the Unix guys were still there when I was there. And it was, we built a lot of cool stuff, but the thing was it never made it out into the real world. There was a term for this, technology transfer problem. How the heck do you get this technology out? And one of the things that I remember, I've sort of crystallized it for me, is that innovation is easy and adoption is hard. Or innovation can be fast and adoption is slow. It's very hard to get the culture to adopt something. I mean, when we were selling this and trying to sell digital audiobooks, there were a tremendous number of people would call up customer service and say, "I'm waiting for my cassettes. Where are my cassettes? Where are my cassettes?" And we would have on the homepage, digital download, digital download. Nobody knew what it meant, and they didn't understand this thing. It had no moving parts. It was just the whole concept. So it took a long time for people to understand that. In fact, the original Napster, I don't know if anybody remembers the original sort of renegade Napster, that sort of, I feel like that taught the culture about downloading digital content.
And it sort of followed through on all those fears that you were talking about earlier.
And it followed through on the fears, yeah. But back to your original question, I'm sorry I'm diverging so much, but I had gotten to know some of the folks. AT&T created a ventures group, AT&T Ventures at the time, and to try to solve the technology transfer problem. And I had gotten to know some of them because I was always working with a team of folks, and we were trying to create something that could actually go out into the market, we thought. And as a result of that, when Don Katz got his venture funding, and they were looking for a VP of technology, one of those AT&T Ventures guys recommended me because he knew I was, he suspected that maybe it would be of interest to me. And at the time, if you think about 1996 when I joined, there were essentially no startups here. They were all on the West Coast in Silicon Valley and Seattle. And so it was kind of a not very common thing to do. And I was like the third or fourth employee at Audible. We had nothing. We were in a dentist's office in Montclair, New Jersey, and we had essentially nothing, a laptop, and it was kind of a drastic change from going from Bell Labs, where you had patent attorneys and you had the guys who invented all the tools that we were using, and the smartest guys in the world, and women as well, and pencils. You had as many pencils as you wanted, and pens, and you could, in a great cafeteria. I mean, it was like this rich environment, and then all of a sudden dropped into a startup with nobody, and I realized very quickly, hey, I would have called so-and-so to answer this question, and I can't call so-and-so anymore. I got nobody. So it was interesting, kind of trying to bootstrap from little into.
But you wanted that, right? You were looking for. You were looking to get away from the pencils and all of the cushy things you were getting.
Well, I mean, I think the thing was, for me, it was like, hey, here actually we'd been trying to build systems and get them into the world, and here was an opportunity to build a system, and if we didn't build the system and get it into the world, the whole company would fail. The company was counted on our actually doing this thing that we were trying to do before and couldn't figure out what to do with it. Here, we had to do it. And so it was a lot of pressure, a lot of time pressure. I'm sure folks who are involved in startups now know this, this long hours. I mean, I worked long hours for months and would go out every Sunday to New Jersey and work, and we just basically did everything you could all the time trying to push the thing forward. But I did want that. Mm-hmm. But it was scary because I didn't really know what I was getting into on the other hand.
Were you really passionate about audiobooks? Was that something that you wanted to see, or was it the challenge of building something new from scratch?
I was not originally, I didn't have the passion for audiobooks that Don Katz had. I had listened to audiobooks and had already that experience that most people who commute with audiobooks have, which is they get home and they drive into their driveway and they just sit in their car. They can't get out of the car because they are just riveted by the story, and it's a super common phenomenon. So I had that experience, and I believed in stories. I believe in talented folks who create things, and so the combination of that, this idea of taking something that I believed was enriching and valuable and great, the ability to listen to books when you couldn't read them, and marry that with technology innovations that would make this more affordable, more widespread, easier, all those things. I mean, that's kind of like I think that's this sort of combination of what the consumer value proposition is and the technology, that sort of, when those things kind of work together and create a new thing, that's when it's the best.
Right. And so you set out to kind of build this from scratch. You made the player, which you have here. You were working on some of the store, building the store and things. What did you see as what was the biggest challenge? What was the thing that you were kind of looking at and saying, how are we going to figure that one out?
How to get a customer. I like to say the hardest problem in a startup is, or a beginning a business, is how to get a customer. It's like I think of it as like a black art. I mean, how do you get a customer? You've got a great idea. You can set up a website. It's available to anybody on the planet. How do you get somebody to actually come to your website and become a regular customer? Do you go and walk on the street and tell them about it, or do you send emails? I mean, it's actually a huge challenge. So that has continued to be the challenge, and Audible is still in growth mode and customer acquisition mode. It's like just relentlessly focused on figuring out ways to do that. We realized early on, because nobody was buying the player, even though we knew that it was a great idea.
How much did the thing sell for?
Well, it was expensive to make. It was the first one. And the one other, if those of you who know about storage, there was, it'd be fun to ask everybody to write down how much storage they thought this had, but I'll just tell you now, 4 megabytes.
How much is that in words?
4 megabytes. How much in words? Well, you could get about, at a just almost unlistenable, I would say barely listenable, I shouldn't say it the other way, barely listenable audio quality, monophonic, we could get about an hour and 3/4 into this, and in 4 megabytes. So I mean, 4 megabytes is less than a track of music these days. So that was another problem we had to solve, which was how the heck do you squeeze these long things? And audiobooks at the time were mostly abridged, so they were 3 to 6 hours long. Nowadays, nobody wants abridged audiobooks. They want the full thing. So they're 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours. They're long. And so delivering a large file over a telephone network and then storing it in this thing, these were other ridiculous problems that we had to solve. But, we kind of had our eye on the ball, which was if you can get it in there, then it's like a great thing. And we had invented this cool thing where you could, kind of like the Palm Pilot, which was super popular at the time, you'd stick it in the dock and you'd press a button and it would keep the part of the audiobook you hadn't listened to, and it would replace it with stuff that you had that was new. So we'd basically kind of move your hour and a half or so through an arbitrarily long audiobook to listen to it. I forgot what your question was, so you'll have to ask me again.
But eventually you gave up on the players. Like this is,
oh, yeah. So
this was something that seemed like a great idea, right?
Yeah, yes. Well, it was a great idea. That was the thing, is we knew it was a great idea. So it was all about like trying to survive and be tactical and opportunistic, and to use the current term, pivot as necessary. So we realized a little-known company selling a brand new device in a brand new product category that nobody knew about, was kind of hard. Nobody was buying many of them. And so we, at the same time, just like I said here, the MP3 player market started to happen, and also Microsoft invented a competitor to the Palm Pilot. And one of the things that one of the attributes of that thing was to have audio support and a cooler screen and stuff. And so actually somebody from Microsoft called us up and said, they said Bill Gates has circled Audible on a list of Fortune, cool companies or something, saying that company would be good for the Pocket PC. And so we decided we would abandon the hardware business, and we would then take advantage of the emerging phenomena of MP3 players and media-enabled PDAs, which are gone, but Pocket Digital Assistant, so personalized digital assistant. And so then we went into partnership mode. So then we tried to partner with everybody out there making a gizmo that you could hold in your pocket. And it caused us to have to adjust our technology. We had to create a way that you could deliver Audible content, copy protected, with all the right user experience. The whole user experience is a whole nother topic, actually. But across platforms. So we wanted it on Rio players and Creative Labs players and Samsung players and Pocket PCs, and that became a massive effort which went on for years and years and years, trying to partner with companies, getting Audible technology into those devices.
And then you finally hit on one particularly exciting partner.
Well, there was an exciting partner. So we had, in that process, we had been talking to a company based in Seattle and Silicon Valley called Portal Player, who were themselves trying to build systems that companies could just wrap their cool plastic around and market as MP3 players or portable video players. And I got a call from the guy there saying, there's a really well-known company that is building a player. They're new to the market, and they want Audible support. They've said explicitly, we want Audible in this thing. And we had been beating down the doors of all the guys making MP3 players who were all making MP3 players as cheap as they could, that just played music, and they were like not sure about Audible. It was extra engineering work for them. So we wanted them to put different audio compression in there, which is another thing. It was just complicated. So he said, you're going to be really happy with this company. I said, that's super cool. Can you tell me who it is? He said, I can't really tell you. So I pressed him, and he said, well, it's a Japanese company. I said, okay, cool. And so a few weeks later, I got a call from Tony Fadell, who was the VP at Apple, and running the, at that time, secret iPod development project. And he said, you know that call you got from Portal Player? That was us. So we're building a portable media player, and we want Audible support in it. So we were unable to get Audible support in it when it released, but about, I guess, 6 months later, there was a firmware update to the iPod and to the iTunes app, adding Audible support. Actually, support for our funky, wacky, proprietary file format and our digital rights management system in the iPod. And actually, to this day, every iPod, every iPhone, every iTunes has support for Audible's wacko proprietary file format .aa and our digital rights management system. So, and I thought, cool, Apple's making a player. That's cool. But who knew that they would essentially, eventually they took out all of our partners who were making MP3 players. But at the time, it was like fantastic. I mean, we were there. And at the beginning, before they had a store, they had this beautiful page on the Apple website. It said audiobooks, and it had all these covers spread across it. It said, go to audible.com, and they drove this tremendous amount of traffic to Audible. So back to the how do you get a customer, the number one technique from Audible's standpoint was co-marketing partners. Find a big partner that's got a business that's compatible with you, who touch the customer, and have them tell the customer about you. That was the big deal.
Yeah, get Apple to support you.
We had an early deal. Yeah, get Apple. And we had an early deal with Amazon, actually, in 2000. And they put all of our catalog in the bookstore. You couldn't buy them there, but they'd say, hey, if you want the audiobook version of this book, go to our trusted partner, Audible. And so traffic being sent to us by these big guys. So, gradually we bootstrapped our way into survival.
So was it like a flip switching moment? I mean, you get this call from Apple. Obviously, they weren't quite as big as they are now. You managed to work out something out with Amazon, who's also significantly smaller at that time. But did you realize at the moment you were like, well, now we have it made. Like and once that happened, all of a sudden it was just like, hockey stick or?
No, I mean, it's hard for me to, it's hard for me to remember whether we thought this was huge or just pretty great. And also the Apple guys were super demanding, and so they wanted a bunch of they're sort of technical purists. So we were going to have to undergo a lot of work also to make it work the way they wanted it to. And so so there was a lot of work involved, but certainly we were excited about it. And once it launched, it became quite a big deal. So we were super excited to get the work done and get in there. And it did change our business for sure, forever. It's ironic in a way that finally, we're at a point now because now everybody's device connects directly to the network, and instead of having to work with, every time you worked with one of these companies, they controlled the software in there. It was all proprietary, hard to do. There were firmware engineers frequently in Asia that you had to work with, and it was very hard engagements with each one of them. Now, nobody does that. Everybody makes an app, and you control your own destiny again. So it's kind of like it's a good time, kind of a golden age that we're in, where everybody gets to control the user experience and all the parameters themselves. it was hard back then.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm going to start crying about how hard it was.
Well, let's talk. I was actually going to ask you another question about how hard it was. The talk about, we're talking about sort of this steady progression. You started working on something. Eventually, you got on with these big partners. It looked like everything was going well, but it was actually kind of a bumpy road along the way, right? I mean, there were periods where you had to lay off a big portion of your staff. The road forward wasn't clear.
No,
Can you just talk about like how that feels? Like what exactly happened and kind of like
feels terrible. We realized sort of 6 or 7 months after launching with this device that we were optimistic. We had hired a little too fast and our burn rate was too high, and we saw that actually we were not going to make it. So we laid off 40% of the company, which was just horrible. And then we kind of regrouped, and later we had another period. I forget even what happened then, what the cause was, but there was another time where we had a layoff of 25% of the company. So we also went public it's a kind of crazy story. We went public in 1999. We had 3,000 customers. We were nowhere near making any money, but it was the bubble. And we said, you know what? If we don't go public, somebody else is going to create a sock puppet with an audiobook in its mouth and call it, and say that they're an audiobooks company, and they're going to essentially go public because everybody went public at the time. So we went public. We went the whole deal with Credit Suisse. I think we got $46 million, and we're on the NASDAQ, and then 6 months later, the whole thing crashed, and our stock went down and down and down and down, and eventually we got delisted. So and we had to get more funding and hang on, and through all of that, back to a thing you said earlier, was we always. And this was true for when I was even offered the opportunity at Audible, which at the beginning I said, well, this is obvious. You're going to digital media delivered over the network to a portable device? Yeah, duh. I mean, sure. That's obviously that's going to happen. So we were just too early, and part of our challenge was trying to survive until the environment around us got to a point where the whole thing worked. From a business standpoint. But we solved a bunch of problems on the way. Like one interesting thing I wanted to mention was that a lot of people didn't have a player that supported our Wacko file system and DRM and customer experience. So we decided what we would do is we would get Audible compatible devices from, say, Rio, that they were getting ready to phase out, and we'd get them cheap from them at cost, and then we would offer them, if you signed up for a year of Audible, if you promised to buy an audiobook a month for a year, then we would discount this player dramatically and get you a player. And ultimately we would work out the economics where we just start giving you players. And so it looked kind of like a cell phone. We called it the cell phone model internally because it was a subsidization of the device to the customer in exchange for a commitment to stay with the service. And audiobooks, once you get hooked on them, you can't listen to one. You can't be riveted for a month and then just decide, hey, I'm not going to get riveted anymore. You actually want another audiobook. So it kind of worked with the kind of content that we had. And so eventually we actually went back into the hardware business. And briefly, we built our own player because we couldn't control the inventory and the price. So we were sourcing a player out of Korea, and we were giving them away. They had all the right buttons on it and all that. And actually, earlier than that, you could get a discount on an iPod. It was Apple never lets any of their retailers muck with their prices. So the iPods cost the same no matter where you bought them. But if you could go to J&R and get $100 off an iPod if you committed to a year of Audible membership, which was kind of a cool thing. So we ended up spreading that around. We ended up doing it at Amazon. We did it a lot of places. So back to your point, there were just challenge after challenge, it seemed like, coming our way, like every week. It's like, oh no, another thing we've got to deal with. But we believed in where we were going. We believed that this was obvious. It was obvious that this was the right thing to do. This is a service that should survive. So it was just a matter of surviving and figuring out the kind of the parameters of it.
And so then eventually at the end of that kind of long road of going public and getting delisted and everything, you ended up getting acquired by Amazon several years later. Can you just take us through that? Like, how did that come to be? Does that end up seeming, like a crowning achievement, or does it end up seeming kind of like the end of the company?
The end, right. No, I mean, we had, like I said, we had done this sort of marketing deal with Amazon in 2000. So we had flown out and met with lots of folks at Amazon. Don Katz and Jeff Bezos would meet at CEO conferences every year and talk. And there was a kind of like a, cultural compatibility between the companies. They had started out as a bookstore, and then they started their own digital media strategy. And actually, we were talking to them. They were working on the Kindle, and we were talking to them about maybe putting Audible support in the first Kindles. This is before the Kindle came out. And then we heard a rumor that maybe they were going to build their own audiobook business, and we got a little worried about that. And all of this time, actually, we were like this little company in New Jersey selling this sort of niche product, audiobooks, which used to be back in the back corner of the bookstore. And so we had this concern that eventually some big company is just going to kill us. I always used to think it was like a little boat in this giant ocean just being thrown all over the place and trying to keep from drowning. And so when Amazon decided that it would be the best thing for them would be to acquire us to fill out their audiobook strategy, it seemed like a good thing. It seemed like a really good thing, actually. We felt protected, supported, and then we had access to all this Amazon technology, we spent a year porting the entire Audible system onto the Amazon stack, because we had this like very messy, it had accumulated stuff over the many years. That's sort of our e-commerce platform, and now we had the biggest e-commerce company in the world, and we had access to their entire system: search, checkout, payment systems, you name it. We had it all, scalable, reliable, all those things. So it seemed like a no-brainer to put ourselves onto that, which was not a requirement, interestingly. We got acquired by Amazon. We stayed in New Jersey. They didn't ask us to change the structure. We kept our own website. Nobody said, as a requirement for this, you got to absorb yourselves inside of Amazon or anything. It was kind of like they said, you're the best at what you're doing. Continue to do that, and just do it better. And that was good. One of the things that happened when I was at Audible is, we succeeded, but it looked like failure a lot. And anytime there was a big obstacle, I thought of it as a way to get energy to move forward. Like if you can figure out some kind of crazy jujitsu move on failure or an obstacle, so that you gain strength from it and move yourself forward, fueled by the learning and your frustration and your recommitment to what you want to do.
Thanks a lot for coming, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, man.